Hello. Today's video we'll be talking about summarizing an author's use of evidence in an informational text. Brought to you by Miss M&M. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So, the ability to analyze and summarize an author's use of evidence is an important skill for us to learn. Too often, we voice our opinion about the evidence used in a text before we completely understand it. Judgment, therefore, should come after we have learned how to articulate the types of evidence used to support an argument. I know it may be challenging to summarize and analyze different types of evidence, especially because it requires a close reading of the text and asks us to write with accuracy and objectivity. So let me break it down step by step. Step 1. Introduce the source, the author, and his or her claim main argument. Let's take the article, The Shifting Boundaries of Adolescence, for example. The Shifting Boundaries of Adolescence is the title of the article. The author of the article is Heidi Ledford. That is the name of the author of the article, Heidi Ledford. Now, those of us who have completed Lesson 3 in our unit should know that the main argument of this article is that adolescence is a social construct that cannot be concretely defined using scientific or political methods. Okay, so this is step 1. We've identified the title of the article, the name of the author, and the main argument of the text. Let's move on to step 2. Discuss the types of evidence the author uses and explain why the author uses it. So I'm going to go through some examples of types of evidence. The first example is personal experiences. So sometimes an author might refer to a personal experience, either their own personal experience or someone that they know, in order to connect with the reader and to show how the issue that they are discussing relates to their lives on a personal level. Another type of evidence is allusions. So an allusion is a reference to a famous or historical, whether current or past, person, figure, event. So sometimes authors will reference, for example, the Trojan War in order to illustrate pretending to be one thing and turning out to be another, right? So they might bring in other historical references. The other type of evidence is anecdotes. So think about a grandparent talking about something that happened to them when they were younger. Typically, anecdotes have a kind of lesson. Sometimes they're humorous. They're just an engaging way to tell a story that has a purpose. The other type of evidence is definition. So sometimes authors will define key words or terms so that you have a better understanding of what they're talking about. Another type of evidence is data, which is made possible by research. So they might discuss a researcher or a study conducted by a researcher, and they might share data from that research. Typically, research and data are good types of evidence because they tend to carry more weight than personal experiences or anecdotes, right? If an author is discussing research and data, we are more likely to believe what they have to say because we believe that it has some objective origin, right? As opposed to telling a personal story, we don't know if it's objective or subjective because everyone's personal story is different. So these are just some examples of different types of evidence. Okay, once you've identified what types of evidence the author is using and why, then you're going to, for step number 3, provide 1 or 2 examples of the author's evidence. Going back to the article, The Shifting Boundaries of Adolescence, the author, Heidi Ledford, uses the anecdote of LeVere as a child in Dr. Tanner's study, as well as research from Dr. Tanner's study that was published in 1970. Okay, these are two types of evidence that she uses in the article in order to illustrate her main argument. So here's an image. It's not of LeVere, but it gives that idea of she is sharing a personal story from LeVere's experience as a subject in Dr. Tanner's study. And then here we see there's actually various research studies that are shown here on this image. So it's not just Tanner's study, but it's also Hall's study and Sawyer's study, which she does talk about in the article. So if that is step 3, step 4 is to tie the evidence back to the author's claim/argument. So let's say the main argument, as we discussed earlier, is adolescence is a social construct that cannot be concretely defined using scientific or political methods. Heidi uses LeVere's anecdote as a subject in Dr. Tanner's study in conjunction with research published from Dr. Tanner's study in order to show that every adolescent is unique, and so that there is no exact time frame that can be used to accurately describe when adolescence begins and when it ends. Okay, let's look at this example. Okay, this could very well be something you might write in a writing class. So let's take the prompt. Okay, this is the prompt for the text that I'm about to show you. Show how Mark Linus uses evidence of a changing world to implicitly argue that global warming is directly impacting communities all over the world and ultimately putting humans at risk. So here's a student response. Mark Linus in the article Global Warming is a Serious Threat to Humanity's Future suggests that climate change due to the steady increase in greenhouse gases is threatening human life. Think to yourself, what is the writer doing in this first sentence that lines up with the steps that I just went through? If you thought to yourself that the writer names the title of the article as well as the author and the author's main claim or argument, then you are correct. Let's move on to the next sentence. In his article, Linus observes changes in weather patterns, the rapid decrease in glacial ice, and the evaporation of lakes and streams in order to illustrate the devastating effect global warming is having on nature and the people who depend on it. Okay, now think to yourself, what is the writer doing in this second sentence that lines up with the steps that I just outlined? If you thought to yourself, step number 2, describe the types of evidence the author uses, then you are correct. In this particular example, the writer discusses how the author of the article, Mark Linus, uses observations as well as, I suppose Linus uses observations in changes in weather patterns, a rapid decrease in glacial ice, and the evaporation of lakes and streams. Okay, so that's naming the type of evidence, Linus's observations, and now it's naming why the author uses it. So in order to, that's a really key transition word phrase to show relationship between ideas. So this type of evidence that Linus uses has the effect of illustrating the devastating effect global warming is having on nature and the people who depend on it, right? So it's not enough to just name the type of evidence. You have to also explain why the author uses that type of evidence. Let's move on to the next sentence. For example, Linus describes severe drought and dust storms that continue to strangle China's northern provinces. Okay, what is the writer doing now in this third sentence? If you thought to yourself that the author is naming 1 to 2 examples of evidence used from the text, then you are correct. Okay, here the author is naming a very specific example. Okay, they are describing how Linus describes severe drought and dust storms that continue to strangle China's northern provinces. And notice how it is taken directly from the text, and I know that because there is a citation right after it. Alrighty, let's go on to the last step, okay? Remember step number 4? What was step number 4? Tie back the evidence back to the author's main claim or argument. So here the writer writes, this evidence suggests that global warming is placing tension on China's water supply, a vital resource for farmers and surrounding communities. Okay, so the writer, again, is tying back to the author of the article's main argument of how devastating climate change is. Okay, and they're showing how the evidence relating to China's northern provinces experiencing severe drought and dust storms is dangerous for the people living in that community because it is threatening the water supply. So all of these sentences work together to summarize how an author uses evidence in order to develop their argument or their claim in the text. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you can now use this information to write your own summaries that analyze an author's use of evidence.